After some serious debating with myself, I installed Ubuntu Focal on my mid-2008 iMac. As Ubuntu is mostly installed on PCs, I was concerned there might be a possibility that some of the iMac's hardware might not be fully supported. On the other hand, if the install worked, I would have an operating system that is at its core really no stranger to me, as I have used many versions of Ubuntu and Debian on PCs for years. In addition, as Focal is a long-term support version of Ubuntu, Focal will be updated and patched until April 2025, meaning that after completing the install, Focal will remain current for over 5 years. At present, my iMac is a 12-year-old computer using a 5-year-old operating system that was last updated 2 years ago. What do I have to lose? If the install borked, I could always reinstall the existing version of El Capitan. So in the risk-reward evaluation, the risk seemed minimal when compared to the rewards I would gain by having a solid contemporary operating system installed on the Mac. Before going any further, here are some of the specs for my iMac. It has a 24-inch pre-Retina monitor with an also pre-Retina 20-inch Apple Cinema monitor attached to the iMac's only mini display port. The iMac has one Intel Penryn dual-core CPU with both cores running at 2.8 gigahertz. It has 4 gigs of RAM. The iMac uses a Radeon HD2600 graphics card with 256 megs of memory. Finally, it has a 256 GIG SSD drive. Yes, by today's standards, the hardware is dated. Certainly this guy isn't a powerhouse, but it has been and is more than adequate for surfing the net, emails, and light word processing. All this being said, the iMac's major weakness is in its graphics card, and as a result, I didn't know if the iMac would be able to run Ubuntu with a really slick GNOME desktop, or would I need to use XFCE desktop in Focal, or did I need to install the much lighter weight Ubuntu OS. In the spirit of you never know till you try, I decided on the Ubuntu Focal OS using the GNOME desktop. Installing Ubuntu 20.04 was non-eventual. Simply download the operating system from Ubuntu, burn the ISO to a DVD, pop the DVD into an optical drive, then turn off the computer. Turn the computer back on while keeping the C key depressed until you see the Apple logo on the screen. This is done to force the optical drive, being the drive being booted. Finally, follow the instructions on the screen. That's all there is to it. Pretty simple. After the install and during the initial restart, the iMac set for 45 seconds with only a white screen displayed on the monitor. It still does this on every start and restart. This is probably because the iMac's EFI can no longer find a default startup partition, so it is searching all possible drives before it continues to load the operating system. From this point forward, startup time is typical for, well, a 2008 iMac with an SSD drive. After my initial startup, I noticed that the Apple Cinema monitor was using the exact background as the iMac monitor. Data wasn't being mirrored, just the background. I like a different background for each of my monitors, and to my surprise, Ubuntu does not natively offer an option to accomplish this. After some Googling, I found a free program called HydraPaper that does that job nicely. Next, I checked all my hardware, and the only piece that wasn't supported was my Wi-Fi. There was no suitable driver for the onboard Wi-Fi Broadcom chip. For me, this was not a deal breaker because this is a desktop machine and it's always on Ethernet. Ethernet seems to be a typical Bonjour/Samba hybrid and finds my server without any intervention from me. My network brother multifunction laser printer pops up as being available on Ubuntu as soon as I turn the printer on. All USB ports function, including those on the Apple Cinema monitor. Surprisingly, when the computer is asleep, the Apple Cinema's power LED gradually increases and then decreases brightness, just like it did when it was connected to the OS X powered Mac. Ubuntu set each monitor to their maximum resolution, and the default video driver provides an image as good, if not better, than the iMac on El Capitan. VLC and Kodi run fine, look good, with no stutter, jitter, or drop frames. Audio works well too. In fact, after adjusting Kodi's audio settings, audio passes through to my Onkyo AVR, and the sound is really good. Adding and updating software is painless. Ubuntu has an excellent graphic user interface package manager as well from the terminal. Sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade also do the trick. The GNOME desktop works fine with my 256 meg Radeon graphics card. I'm glad I chose the GNOME desktop. It is clean and simple. If you can use any Windows or Mac desktop since Windows 95, then adapting to the GNOME will be a piece of cake. However, if you have any problems, there's even a set of instructions on the left side of the favorites bar. Just click the question mark icon. To this point, my newly dubbed iMac Ubuntu had shown that it had the resources to easily run Ubuntu 20.04 with the GNOME desktop. In addition, I've been able to find and install every program or program alternative that I needed. To this point, the only real issue was a lack of Wi-Fi. However, when I put the iMac Ubuntu into my work environment, another gremlin became apparent. The aforementioned gremlin appeared after I would place the computer on suspend. And when I woke the Mac Ubuntu up, the network often would be missing in action. I tried every terminal or GUI solution I could find to get the network reconnected, and there simply was no joy. All that was left was to simply reboot the computer. From my research on this issue, this seemed to be an ongoing problem with Ubuntu 20.04 and past versions as well. There is good news though. After a system upgrade several weeks ago, the gremlin left, and the network now joins the rest of the computer services when the iMac Ubuntu wakes up. Please keep in mind that though this particular install worked with minimal issues, I am in no way implying that installations on other Macs, either from 2008 or from any other year for that matter, will go as smooth. A good example is in installing Ubuntu on first generation Intel Macs. The EFI is, for lack of a better term, a hybrid 32-bit, 64-bit piece, and as a result will not accept a 64-bit operating system without some workarounds. I am speaking from experience as I tried an Ubuntu install on a Mac Pro 1.1. I finally found a modified operating system and got the computer functioning, but it was a tortoise. The graphics card was a problem and could not take even minimally complex graphics. So in short, Apple has made a lot of different products. Some will be more adaptable than others. Do your research before jumping into any operating system update, especially if it's going to be a different operating system. So finally, after using the iMac Ubuntu for 3 months, aside from the Wi-Fi issue and that little suspend issue, trading El Capitan for Ubuntu Focal has resulted in an outcome that has exceeded my expectations. I have Big Sur installed on a MacBook Pro, and I find that I prefer the GNOME desktop over Big Sur. The Ubuntu GNOME combination has proven to be a very efficient package. It is far less intrusive on my privacy than recent Mac operating systems. and has put new life into my 12-year-old iMac. The only regret that I have is that I did not update the iMac with Ubuntu sooner.